Psychology is different things to different people. As you will read in Chapter 1, psychology is a broad field, probably broader than you expected in advance of taking this class. Over its history, psychology has developed in many directions. Often these directions have been guided by cultural and historical factors. At other times, movements in the field have developed in response to a failure to study certain topics. The early perspectives in psychology were largely a product of two major 19th century movements. Structuralism, the first major perspective in psychology, looked at the structures of consciousness, essentially breaking it down into its component parts. This approach was directly a product of the mindset of the Industrial Revolution. As people were taking a more machine-oriented approach to interacting with the world, it was natural that they would also start to view the person as a machine. Another major development of the 19th century was the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. In pursuing this idea that features of species evolve according to their survival value, the functionalists asked the same question. What is the function, especially the survival function, of consciousness and other human traits? Meanwhile, in Vienna, Sigmund Freud was working with patients and developing a psychodynamic model of personality development. This was a substantially different domain from that being covered by the other two groups, who were focusing more on consciousness, perception, and memory. While he conducted this work over a period of decades, starting in the late 1800s, it grabbed hold in the U.S. most strongly during the Roaring 1920s, a time when people were clearly more open to his provocative ideas on sexuality, dreams, and the like. In the 1910s and 20s, work in the domain of behaviorism also was taking place. Ivan Pavlov studied conditioned learning in animals, while John Watson studied behaviorism in humans. Their approach was far more coldly scientific than Freud's, positing that the field should study only observable human behavior and not bother with internal processes like thought and emotion. While Freud's ideas dominated the popular imagination in the 20s, behaviorism gained more attention in the colder climate of the 1930s Depression era, a time when people no longer were so excited about or able to afford Freudian therapy. Another cultural phenomenon that affected psychology in the 1930s was the persecution and exile of Jewish intellectuals from Nazi Germany. Many of these intellectuals fled to the U.S., where they were instrumental in founding the New School for Social Research in New York. Many of these German intellectuals were key figures in the Gestalt in psychology, which focused less on component parts, like structuralism, and more on the whole big picture. They principally studied visual perception and other aspects of cognition. World War II was, of course, a jarring period in world history, and in its aftermath there were many new questions about the nature of humanity and its capacity for what had just taken place. In surveying the landscape of psychology in the early 1950s, a group of scientists did not like what they saw. On one hand, there was Freud's psychodynamic model, with a fairly negative view of humans as slaves of their personal history, unconsciousness, and sexual drives. On the other hand, behaviorism and its coldly scientific approach to the study of humans. These scientists propose what they called a third force in the field, called humanistic psychology, arguing that the other two groups lacked appreciation for what is truly valuable and meaningful about being human. The humanists wanted to turn the focus of the field to positive aspects of humanity: love, personal growth, peak achievements. In the 1960s, another group rebelled against the prevailing mindset. Most scientific psychology had been conducted by the behaviorists. However, these researchers disliked the behaviorist contention that internal processes were off limits for the psychology. So these cognitive psychologists took the approach that internal processes such as memory, perception, language, etc. could in fact all be studied scientifically. The 1970s saw further developments based on cultural factors. The women's movement brought about further awareness of deficiencies in its domination by males and male perspectives. The feminist psychologists took the approach that the field should study all people and turn some of the focus to previously neglected areas: the role of relationships in development, menstruation, development of feminine identity, among others. In recent years, the most major impact on the field has been by the emergence of technologies that allow us to observe the structures and activity of the brain. Before these, the extent to which we could study biology of personhood was limited mostly to autopsies of people who had suffered brain disorders. The emergence of biological psychology has allowed the field to begin correlating behavior and disorders with brain levels. This field has major implications for the future of the field and mental health in general. All of these approaches to psychology study different things, and all were products of the culture at the time, both the culture of the field and the greater social culture. So, returning to the question of what is psychology, depends on whom you ask. A behaviorist, a Freudian, a humanist, all will give different answers.